Hello, everyone. You're on People of the World podcast. And today with me, Akibatoru, the Israeli ambassador to the Republic of Korea. And first of all, thanks a lot for participating in here. It's a great pleasure for me to have you here. And congratulations for your role in there. You told me that you're less than a year there, right? You're from November there. So how was your welcoming there during Corona?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because on the one hand, Korea is having a hard time with the vaccination drive. Only less than 5% of the population is vaccinated, and they're not slated to reach herd immunity until perhaps November. But on the other hand, the level of illness and sickness is very, very low. It's a country of 52 million people, and it's rare for infections to be more than 500 a day. And they're testing everyone. When I first got here, I mean, the level of sickness in Korea was 1/50th, 1/50 that of Israel. So on the one hand, they've had a hard time with the vaccines. Japan is also having a similar problem. But on the other hand, they've really handled the disease. So I got to a country where the country is not in lockdown. Restaurants have been open the entire time that I've been there. I was able to go to concerts even in November, December, although they had all kinds of social distancing. And I found a society which is extremely disciplined. They behave according to the rules and the regulations.
First of all, why does it call the Republic of Korea and no South Korea like we know it?
Okay to call them South Korea, and it's not considered to be offensive, but it wouldn't be the formal legal name on the passport.
Got it. Okay, that's super interesting, I have to say. What's the difference between like Israelis and Koreans, and how can you close this gap in your experience?
Well, look, they're East Asia and we're West Asia. It's really like an East side, West side story where Israel's on literally the western end of the Asian continent, and Korea is part of East Asia, and it's almost the furthest east. Japan is a little bit further east, and there are ways of behavior and Confucianism, Buddhism, spiritual influences, centuries of how peoples behave, and it's characteristic not only of Korea, it's characteristic also of Japan, to a large extent China.
Can you give me an example of this gap that you experienced there, maybe?
Well, for example, my Korean staff in the embassy. So they're incredible people, very skillful, extremely diligent, work very hard, very, very committed to the job, and extremely conscientious. But creativity is not, I mean, it's something that they're certainly capable of, but it's not part of the education system. And they're always telling me how, well, we're working in the Israeli embassy, we have to be more Israeli, which means we have to have more chutzpah. And I say, absolutely, that's completely what we want. But it doesn't come natural. It's a society which is deferential. I mean, by the way, there are a lot of things which are very similar to Israel. For example, the Korean society is very ancient. The roots of the Korean Republic, of the early Korean Republic, go back to what would be the First Temple period if we were looking at Jewish history. Or it's 500, 600, 700 years before BC. They love their language. They're very, very, very appreciative of their deep culture, the art, calligraphy, literacy. They're very, very family oriented, very, very devoted to parents. And these are all things, they like their own cuisine. These are all things which in many ways remind me of Israel. On the other hand, it's a more ordered society. I would say Korea is really a Confucian state. In other words, if you want to understand the deep logic of the Korean system, you have to read the Confucian Analects. Things are built in an ordered way. Bureaucracy is hard to break through. In Israel, I mean, the other day I had to find something out, and I just called directly the Director General of the Israel Ministry of Health, and he answered the phone, and we spoke and had a conversation. That would be very, very difficult to do here. The Korean diplomats are very skillful, and they know where they are. They're sophisticated, and they know that not everywhere is East Asia.
Okay.
Just as Israeli diplomats know that not everywhere is Israel. And we also have to adapt our behavior to the place where we're at.
Great. So, by the way, you talk about like Korean cuisine. Can you give like some example of what yours, if you have right now, favorite Korean cuisines that I don't know what your favorite?
Well, actually, the Korean cuisine is a huge problem for me because I'm a modern Orthodox, and I keep kosher and Shabbat, and pretty much the Korean cuisine is everything which is forbidden in Leviticus 23.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that's quite a challenge there for you.
Yes. They eat a lot of pork and a lot of octopus.
Got it.
And sometimes shrimp and sometimes squid. And I have not tasted
vegans? There is no vegans in South Korea?
Well, there's temple food. In other words, Buddhism exists in Korea. About a third of the Korean population is Buddhist, but they're oftentimes not strict Buddhists. So they're not vegetarian Buddhists. So there are vegetarian restaurants, but not a huge amount. I served in Taiwan in the 90s, and that was a more Buddhist country, and there were more vegetarian possibilities. But as an ambassador, I'm pretty well taken care of. I mean, I have a residence which belongs to the state of Israel. We have a kitchen staff, so I'm doing fine. And I was able also to locate kosher meat, a number of sources here in Korea, and but I haven't partaken a lot of the cuisine, which I hear from my staff, which is not kosher observant, that it's excellent.
Okay, that's interesting. I wonder. I mean, that's more like a general question, but I wonder what is your take on this? What do you think is the current role of an ambassador? Because we live in a pretty much connected time, era even, and I wonder how does it affect, if it's affect the role of ambassadors in general, and if you can be more specific, because I think that South Korea is pretty connected, and also Israel, you know, for every sense of communication. So I wonder what's your perception of this?
Well, it's a good question, but it actually, answering the question is the exact reason why I wanted to come to a country like Korea. Korea is a country with there are huge worth for Israel, and Israel can also offer a lot to Korea. I'll just elaborate briefly. Sometimes, you know, I hear ambassadors here oftentimes saying, "Oh, there's a synergy between our national economy and the Korean economy," and frankly, they're just talking blah blah. It's not correct.
Okay.
But there actually is a true synergy between the Israeli economy and the Korean economy. We're a smaller country. We're a fifth the size of Korea. Israel's an innovation powerhouse, but we're not strong in manufacturing, and we really can't be strong in manufacturing because
of the size.
Israel's too small, and we don't have the room for heavy factories which are going to produce tens of thousands of automobiles and produce steel, so on and so forth. Korea is large enough for it, and Korea is brilliant at manufacturing, brilliant at global marketing, but not very strong in technological innovation.
Okay, that's interesting.
So we really, really have what to offer each other. And you see it in, for example, Samsung has a strong presence in Israel. Some of the other Korean conglomerates, they all have a presence in Israel. In my opinion, not enough. That's where my job comes in.
Okay.
At the end of the day, it's true. We're in a modern world. Korea is hyper-connected. Korea is 5G. There's Wi-Fi everywhere. Israel is also very connected. It's not a problem for the president of Korea to call the Israeli prime minister or for the foreign ministers to speak directly. But the point is that they won't, or they won't do it naturally. It's out of sight, out of mind. They're here and we're there. And that's why it's important to have a national office that can, I'm here to look out for the Israeli interest, to advance the Israeli national interest here, and to try and to do it in a way that also meets, I'll only be successful if I'm also meeting real needs of Korea. But the presence, my presence, the presence of my staff, the fact that we're working here, that we're trying to make as much noise, positive noise as we can, we are making things happen that wouldn't otherwise happen.
Can you give me an example for this?
Well, an example. What is my job? For example, I will not have succeeded in my job if I do not bring about a presidential visit by the president of Korea to the state of Israel. 2 Israeli presidents have visited Korea, Shimon Peres and Reuven Rivlin. There is never, in 60 years of relations, there has never been a visit by the Korean head of state to Israel. There are reasons for it. I think the reasons have to do with kind of being risk averse, worrying about how some Arab states might react to it. The Abraham Accords have not fully sunk in yet, but this is something that a proactive diplomacy can bring about. The problem's not structural; it's behavioral. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if I work the right way, we'll make it happen. If we have an economic attaché, Yaniv Goldberg from the from Israel Ministry of Economic Affairs, and we work very close together. And we need to convince the major Korean conglomerates to open research and development centers in Israel. Samsung has one, but SK, LG, Hyundai Motors, they don't. And if we do our work the right way, we can find the way to get the senior leadership of these organizations. We can get their attention.
You talk about,
and that's the job of an embassy today.
Can you be more specific about the behavioral obstacles? I'm guessing that there are. I mean, is it like more of a political pressure that there are on the Korean government to not visit Israel? Is there something else that we're maybe under the radar that why is not being more, I would say, war? I mean, because I know that the relation between Israel and Korea are pretty warm, right? It's like a full diplomatic relation. We're export and import, but
they are warm. They are warm. At the same time, Korea also has diplomatic relations with Iran. The Korean prime minister, who's not the head of state, it's the prime in the presidential system. Prime minister is lower than the senior ministers, but he led an economic delegation to Tehran not a long time ago. So I mean, Korea is looking at the Middle East, and Korea does not have petroleum, and they need sources of oil. So they're also, a Korean ship was captured by the Iranian National Guard and was held for 3 months for absolutely no reason in an Iranian port. So the Koreans are thinking about the fact that they need to maintain their freedom of navigation in the Straits of Hormuz, and they don't want to get caught up in our problems. They have also certain issues that we don't want to get in the middle of. Korea and Japan are in a very deep feud about the history of the Second World War, and not only that, and Israel, we would really try not to get in the middle of that argument, even though Koreans have some very strong things to say. But I think that the major issue is that, you know, at the end of the day, states, modern nation states, are not run by AI. They're run by people. Therefore, they still have the limitations of human biology, which means there's a limited attention span that the head of state and that the senior ministers have. And Korea is another point in which it's similar to Israel is they're very, very self-involved, and they're very, very internally political. As in Israel, we're talking all about, we're driving ourselves crazy about how we're going to form a government and what that government is going to be. The Koreans have kind of similar kinds of internal debates with themselves. So what I'm trying to say is that Israel doesn't pop up into the Korean consciousness immediately. The Korean foreign minister, the Korean minister of defense doesn't say, oh, I must go to Israel tomorrow. And nor does that happen on the Israeli side. And that's the job of a diplomat, to say, hey, come, I'm here. And by the way, we're going to have in less than 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a very senior ministerial delegation from Israel. Our foreign minister, Gabi Ashkenazi, together with the Minister of Economic Affairs, Amir Peretz, are coming to Korea approximately May 11th and 12th approximately to sign a free trade agreement. And this will actually be Israel's first free trade agreement with any Asian country. And it will be Korea's first free trade agreement with any Middle Eastern country.
Wow.
So that's good.
That's great. So by the way, I know it's like a little bit a general question again, but what is the perception of Israel or about Israelis?
Israel is a very strong brand in Korea. And by the way, I think Korea is also a very strong brand in Israel. I was in home leave for Pesach, when I got my vaccinations, and also my kids are all in Israel, so I got to see everyone. And I met all kinds of partners, heads of major museums in Israel, also business people. Everyone wants to do something with Korea. And the same thing is true in Korea. Koreans are very interested in Israel. They've heard a lot about Israel. Right at this moment, there are 2 Korean television crews in Israel covering the whole vaccination story.
Wow.
They believe that we're a hugely successful and united country. It's oftentimes heartwarming to hear them talk about us. They see Israel as a huge success, a small country that through ingenuity and through the unity of the internal unity of its people has managed to withstand incredible odds. To a certain extent, it's not untrue about Korea as well. The Republic of Korea, or South Korea, was an extremely poor country at the end of the Korean War in 1953. It was a level of poverty which was greater than the poverty of Israel in the early 50s. Even though Israel was in an extremely difficult economic situation, it wasn't the same. There was hunger in Korea. And through hard work, through very difficult policy of industrialization, they became a wealthy country. And they're proud of this accomplishment, but they also see it in us. They're also aware that we're a country with really no resources.
So it's a little bit parallel, right? In a way, we go in some way in the same directions in that sense.
I mean, there's the story of Korea and Israel are similarities and differences.
Again, you see some connection or some similarity between Israelis and Korean, right? We're like the startup nation. We really want to achieve more, but it seems that the Korean takes a different, maybe even corrosive path in that sense. They work, tirelessly to be, even to that affects their personal life, I'm guessing. So do you think
they work terribly hard? They work terribly, terribly hard. They work very, very long hours. The legal work week is 52 hours a week.
Wow.
There are a lot of times in certain professions, there's expectations of people to go out, and to entertain together. Israelis, by the way, also work very hard. Israel is a very hard-working country. And
so
by the way, I know
Israel. Do you think that there is a chance that Israel will take the same path in that sense? Or go, or will? Just thinking maybe because
I think look, I
there are
think our
some
national
similarities.
I think our national characters are very, very different, really. And I mean, there are many similarities, and there are a lot of reasons for us to find interest in each other.
Mhm.
But we're quite different. At the end of the day, I think Israelis, we want our kids to have a good childhood, to be
happy.
free. What?
To be happy,
I
I'm
think
guessing.
to be happy, yeah.
Mhm.
I think Israelis are happier.
Okay, so that's super interesting, I
And
have to say. By the way, you
yeah.
mentioned that your family stays in Israel, right?
Right now, my family is in Israel, including my wife. My wife will join me in September.
Mhm.
Uh, but the I have two kids in high school. My son is in the IDF, and a daughter who just is finishing high school,
Mhm.
and will go for a year of midrashah before she begins her IDF service. But yeah, that by the way, that is a great difficulty in diplomacy. It's that families are not mobile in the way that they once were.
Mhm.
I served in 3 other postings, and all of them, my family came with me.
So how is it? I mean, I wonder how does it affect like the I'm guessing your experience there, because it's pretty like it's like a pretty far from home, I'm guessing.
What's causing me to work too hard,
Okay.
because I come home, and instead of talking to my wife like a normal person, I continue working.
Hmm.
So,
Maybe it's like the Korean experience in that sense, it's a little bit. So okay, so I
maybe a
really
little bit.
okay,
But
so
yeah,
mhm.
but WhatsApp really helps. I mean,
Hmm.
because I speak to my family members all the time, and it's
Mhm.
unlimited, and but yeah, it's a difficulty. It's not easy.
Okay, but well, you talk about this. We're talking about this connection to Israel and this connectivity between nations. Do you think that we will see a better connection between Israelis and Korean, not like diplomacy, not like business, in more in more like a human or friendship way between Israelis and Korean?
Well,
Because
I think that
is
there's
it possible
plenty
that
of I
we'll
think
have?
there's plenty of room for that, and
Mhm.
we're working on. First of all, we have a huge asset here as an Israeli embassy working here, and that is that a third of the population is Christian,
Mhm.
and that's about 10% Catholic and 25% Protestant, devout Protestant. It's interesting. It's not exactly American evangelical Christianity. It's actually Methodists and Presbyterians, but before the revolution in those churches in the United States, they're still very, very conservative and extremely pro-Israel and interested in Israel, interested in the Bible, the Old Testament, and interested in the Holy Land.
Mhm.
So this is something I mean, as soon as we can open an air corridor with Korea, we want to renew tourism. There were 60,000 Korean tourists a year
Mhm.
before COVID, and it was growing by leaps and bounds all the time. We need to get back to that.
Mhm.
We also had direct flights through Korea Airlines. So that's one element, simply people coming over. The Korean K-drama is becoming, it's all over the place, and
Like
including in
K-pop,
Israel.
I would say, right?
And there's also the K-pop.
Mhm.
And this is something I'm actually looking to make a connection between Israel and Korea. I mean, if we could find a way to bring about a Korea-Israel co-production of a successful K-drama,
Oh, wow.
that would be great.
Yes.
And yeah, well, it's something I'm working on, but I don't want to talk about it so much in the podcast. I mean, I'm not I'm doing it as government, but we've got some ideas, and we're working with a number of people to try to make it happen. And we would also like to bring about a connection between relevant Israeli artists,
Mhm.
musical artists, and the K-pop scene here.
Is
There
there
are
like Koreans know about like Israeli culture? I don't know, Israeli
not
films.
about that less,
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
that less.
Because I think that we know
But
more about their
they
music, right? Maybe because it's much
look,
more.
they don't know Ehud Banai, and they but uh, but I mean, there's no reason why they should know Netta, for example. But
Mhm. Oh, wow. Okay.
But look, the Koreans, the K-pop scene is very much a Korean K-pop scene. They have BTS and they have Blackpink and they've and their thing. The question is if we can connect with it. And
No, I think we're
that
quite the opposite. I think it's usually quite like K-pop, right? If I'm not mistaken, for example.
What, Israelis?
More than like the usual, not like
Well,
American
I don't know.
pop,
There's
but...
a certain sector of Israeli young people who like K-pop.
No, but I
It's
wonder,
not-
do you think that like Israeli art can be, or art or music or film can be successful in Korea? Are they open to this kind of I don't know, foreign art form? Or I don't
Well,
know.
let's put it this way: Shtisel is on Netflix here.
Okay.
I don't know if it's going to break through, but it is on Netflix here, and there are people here who've heard of Fauda, and they know Gal Gadot, and
Okay,
like
like
I
the
said,
rest.
Israel, I mean, look, there's also been a number of Israeli novels that have been translated into Korean. Amos Oz, Edgar Keret, Aleph Bet Yoshua as well, but I wouldn't say that we're in the mainstream of the Korean culture, but again, we're a strong brand. They have some misconceptions about Israel, some very nice misconceptions about Israel.
Come on, share it with me. I wonder what it's.
They believe that we're all Talmud scholars.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. So
Yes.
what's every one of us? So
they
think that
believe that
Israel is
we're all
like,
Talmud scholars, and this is why we're so intelligent.
so they don't see us as a secular state.
Well, they see Talmud as a book of tremendous wisdom and insight. I don't know if they necessarily connect it to a metaphysical outlook.
Wow, this is super interesting. Okay, what else? What are the other perception do they have? Like nice perception, nice
They
perception.
think, well, they don't make in the common Korean perception, they don't make a real difference between Israel and the Jewish people.
Okay, so like the Arab minority is not considered as part of the.
Well,
Israeli.
it's not that they're against they're just not aware of it. They're not aware of it. My deputy, the deputy ambassador of Israel in the Republic of Korea, is a Israeli Arab Muslim woman, and we certainly Rasha Tamna, we certainly never hide this in any way, but they have they have certain perceptions of Jews which are also perceptions of Israel, and so it's something which is very common throughout East Asia. There are sometimes perceptions of the Jewish people that we would normally consider them anti-Semitic, but they're understood as philo-Semitic. Jews are very good. Jews are very powerful. Jews are very good with finance. Jews are able to accomplish this. They're able to accomplish that, and worthy of all respect. So I'm not saying
but
that
it's a misconception.
These are attitudes which are shared through, I think, in large parts of East Asia, and it's kind of sort of like a positive stereotype of Jews, which isn't always grounded in harsh reality, comes in.
So if I understand, you want to achieve like a better connection, right, between the Israel. That's what your main
I would
goal.
say, I would describe it this way: I want a deeper engagement politically and economically between the State of Israel and the Republic of Korea. And one of the tools by which we will do this is a very powerful and energetic public diplomacy program. We're running, an Israeli embassy is never going to be one of the largest embassies in any country. We're a country of 9.3 million. I can't compete in terms of resource, surely not with the US embassy, but also not with the German, French, or UK embassy. And I'm also going to have some problems against the Europeans, because every European country's got two embassies. They have their own embassy and they have the European Union embassy. So the Israeli embassy has to be very proactive, and we have to make a lot of noise.
Okay.
and good noise.
We know how to make
So
noise, you know, we're Israelis. We're
Well,
pretty
we
noisy.
have a very active social media program, and I would encourage I hope that you'll look us up. Where we have our platforms are called Israel in Korea or Akibatoru, which is my Twitter account and Facebook, where those are work accounts, and we talk about everything that we're doing and trying to move forward. And everything that we post is posted in English and in Korean. There's, you know, so we're doing that, and I'm going to be giving a lecture, a series of lectures about Talmud, because
Great,
that's
because all of us are
well.
Talmud scholars. Or
We're signing a free trade agreement. We're producing. There are 85 Korean students in Hebrew University learning Hebrew in Rothberg, and we're running a whole program with them. We're going to produce videos in Korean, and we're as active as we can. Next week, I'm hosting an iftar for the Muslim diplomats here in Korea. So it's all if we want to get our job done, we have to work 3 times as hard.
Sure. By the way, do you speak any Korean?
And smart. What?
But you speak any Korean? Do you have like a
very
favorite?
little? I've been taking Korean lessons. 안녕하세요, 안녕하십니까, 감사합니다. You know, these are just pet phrases. I can read the alphabet, but
do you have any favorite word or any favorite phrase that you like?
Well, the interesting thing is that anio means no and ne means yes, which is very confusing.
Yes. By the way, do you find any similarity between like Hebrew words and Korean words?
Only one. That's the word for mother.
Which is?
In Hebrew, ima, and there it's imea. It's similar. Similar. Cool. But that's probably like mother. That's probably sort of like a universal thing that has to do with the way babies make noises.
Yeah.
There isn't a lot. Korean is a difficult language. It's one of the most difficult languages for Westerners to learn. Mm-hmm. And I have to make a decision now. I'm exactly at the point where I have to decide whether I'm going to invest a lot of time in trying to learn the language, or if I'm going to accept the fact that I'll never be fluent in it, and therefore maybe I should invest in other things. Mm-hmm. I hope that I don't make the second decision. I hope that I don't give up on acquiring ability to converse in Korean.
And let's just go to conclusion. Where do you see the Israeli-Korean relation in like 5 or even 10 years from now?
Well, I'll tell you. I'll say what my aspirations are.
Is it going to be better? You think that
our mutual trade by now at present is 2.5 billion a year, and we need to triple that.
In 5 years, you think it's possible?
5 to 10 years. We need it to be a lot more.
And you think that it's possible? Do you think that there is like in Israel and in Korea, that you think that there is the system that will support this?
Well, what I think is I think it would make a lot of sense for the Korean high-tech conglomerates to be investing much more in Israeli operations. That would put a lot of money into Israel. That would put a lot of money into our research infrastructure. Mm-hmm. That would take Israeli innovation and put it into Korean products, which are marketed all over the world. There's very interesting things happening here cutting edge things happening in terms of the creation of vehicles. The Korean automakers are working very hard in developing the next phase of EV, electric vehicles.
Because they don't like Tarantos, because they don't like the old.
Well, they don't like Taranto, but they're also really forward thinking. They're the battery technology, the issues of mobility, how to do smart transportation, and we need to get as much of Israel into those vehicles as possible because they're going to sell all over the world.
What do you mean as much as Israel in these vehicles? In what sense? Like to
Well,
buy them?
because, no,
Or?
because we've quite a lot of startups in Israel.
Oh,
that
Israeli
are
technology in
thinking
those
about
cars, you
smart
mean?
transportation and smart mobility and
You mean Israeli
all kinds of
technologies inside
yes,
those
Israeli
vehicles? Okay,
technology.
got it.
That's what I mean.
Okay, great.
That's what I mean.
So, and in your eyes, it's possible to make a better connection or more fruitful connection between Israel and Korea in the
I think
in the
so.
foreseeable future.
I don't see structural. I don't see obstructions that are structural. I have to admit I'm still learning the job, and I don't want to display bluster and false optimism. But I think that we can do a lot.
Thanks a lot again. Thanks a lot for participating.
It's
in
my
this.
pleasure, Sinai, and thank you very much for doing this.
And how can I greet you for goodbye in Korean?
You should say, you should say Desene Tor Gamsamnida, which means Ambassador Tor, thank you very much. Desene Tor Gamsamnida. Gam Sahamnida.
Dam Sahamnida.
Desene Tor Gam Sahamnida.
Desene Tur Gam Sahamnida.
Exactly.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.